The good news is you can learn to do this. It's not an innate quality reserved for top-tier medical students. And trust me, this is what makes the difference between an average medical student and a great one. Have you ever been on a clinical placement and awkwardly stood in a corner, not really knowing what to do, who to speak to, and what you were going to learn, and just hoping that somebody would take you under their wing? We've all been there at some point. Unfortunately, this is an all too common scenario. If you're lucky and you have an organized placement, you'll be given a timetable and you'll be able to shadow specific doctors around in the week. But even then, it still feels like you're a nuisance sometimes, and doctors may even forget that you're meant to be shadowing them. So you're left with a lot of wasted time and not very much learning. And it can definitely feel like you're a burden and doctors have to go out of their way to teach you something or show you something interesting. To make my point, I want to tell you about a specific medical student. When I was working in the emergency department as an F1, I noticed one day what I thought was a medical student show up and then basically stand around in a corner trying or maybe just looking invisible. Now, as a junior doctor, the discomfort is fresh in your memory, so I went up to the student and thought I'd make it easier for him to participate and join in for the learning. I introduced myself and got him to shadow me while I went to see some of my patients, just like other doctors had done for me when I was a medical student. He was really happy about this and told me that the whole week he'd been in the emergency department but hadn't really seen much because everybody seemed so busy. To be fair, this was the emergency department during COVID, so that is a fair point. After seeing one or two patients together, I suggested that he go clerk a patient, so take a history, examine, and then come back and speak to me about them. Once you have a gist of how to take a history and how to examine, you just need to jump right in and start doing it yourself. So he was a bit hesitant, but he went along to do that and then came back and started presenting. Now, at this point, if I had clerked the patient, I would have ordered the initial investigations, started some initial management, and then because I was an F1, I have to go speak to the consultant or a senior registrar, speak to them about the patient, make sure they're happy with the plan, and at some point they would come round to see the patient themselves. So once he had presented one of the patients and we'd worked through it together, I suggested that he present the other one to the consultant. Now, obviously, even for a junior doctor, that is a bit terrifying. You need to present a patient to somebody who's very senior to you, who's very busy looking after the emergency department. And so you have to be succinct and very clear with what your management plan is. I could tell that he didn't really want to do it, so I left it up to him, and all credits to him, he actually did went to present to the consultant. And although he was nervous and at some points he stumbled a bit, the consultant knew it was a medical student, was patient with him, and also admired the fact that he came up to present to a consultant, because it does take nerves. All three of us then had a discussion with a bit of teaching about the patient's condition, and something changed after that. I could tell that he'd pushed himself in a really stressful situation, and from that he'd been able to learn lots, realize that he can actually do this by himself, and now had developed a bit of an appetite for trying more of these stressful but also very beneficial situations. And it really was the case for the rest of the evening. For the next patient, we had to request a CT head, and for CT heads you need to call the radiology consultant or senior registrar, and you need to vet that scan, which means they need to agree that this is indicated for the patient. Again, for this you need to be very succinct and clear with your presentation and why you think the patient absolutely needs a CT head. I suggested that he have that chat with the radiologist, which is another nerve-wracking thing. It can be scarier than an ED consultant. So we went through the important positives and negatives you need to mention and how to make it very succinct. He then called the radiologist, introduced himself as a medical student. Obviously I was there if they needed to speak to a doctor, and got the CT vetted. He later told me that hands down he'd learnt more that evening than the entire week put together. The truth is, you're not always going to have a doctor proactively taking you under their wing. And I know that it can be scary and nerve-wracking and intimidating to be in that spot as the medical student. It is easier to take the path of least resistance and passively hang around until somebody finds it in them to teach you something, or even just not show up to placements. But here's the thing, you're not expected to know everything as a medical student. You're not even expected to know everything you've been taught. We all forget, which is why you'll often be told that a final year medical student probably knows more than they will in a few years. In my opinion, that is not what makes you a good doctor. You learn to be a good doctor through experience. There is no way around it. I wish there were, but there isn't. You can be the top student and have photographic memory, and sure, it'll help, but it's useless if you've not seen the signs on enough patients. You can describe every cardiac murmur, but it's useless if you don't know what it actually sounds like in real life. You can know your ILS and ALS perfectly, but it's useless if you've never actually seen a team get together and perform it. The key is to lean into the discomfort of new experiences. Try and catch as many as you can. The more you experience, the quicker you will learn. You will fail, not know the answer answers, get things wrong 10 times, but you'll learn to avoid those through your experiences and you'll get it right those 3 times. Whereas if you're afraid of trying and paralyzed with the risk of failure, you'll try only 1 time and either be really lucky and succeed or fail, and that just breaks your confidence and you just don't try again. Same day, a week after, I saw a medical student do this in action. I honestly almost mistook him for a doctor, and it's not because he was a genius or anything. It was just obvious that he had experience. He had been leaning into those uncomfortable new experiences for months, and you could tell. He asked to shadow, asked to see patients by himself, and was just very proactive about the whole thing. At one point, one of my patients in ED that we'd seen together deteriorated, and I had to take him to recess. While I was examining the patient, he quickly went to get the relevant people, informed the consultant, and then we all transferred him to recess. He then offered to cannulate and was just ready to help out in whatever way that he could. I was so impressed by his eagerness to learn. He had understood that the sooner he experienced as much as he could, the quicker he would learn. And again, he didn't necessarily display amazing knowledge and amazing practical skills. I think he even failed to do the cannula. But that's the point. As a medical student, get stuck in and fail. I think there's a famous quote that says that you will fail at something 100 times before you get it right. So try and get those 100 times out of the way as quickly as possible. And it's the same thing for everything in life, I think. Making conversation, riding a bicycle, learning to cook, it's all the same. Experience as much as you can, try, and try again. So this is the advice that I'd give myself if I could go back in time. And honestly, it's still advice that I try to apply now as a junior doctor because it never stops. Lean into the discomfort of new experiences. Have the aim to learn, not to avoid failure. Remind yourself when you fail that failure is a teacher. Move through it and view it as inevitable for your learning. Honestly, it's hard to do this. It's uncomfortable, but at least it's worth it. Just like active recall is harder than highlighting a page, but more worth it. And I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to be perfect at it. But failing at trying to lean into new experiences is fine. It's part of the process. Just keep going at it bit by bit. Start with a target of once in the week or once a day that you try to do that. And bit by bit, you'll lean into those experiences and you'll start reaping the rewards and enjoy how much you learn by this. Success is the ability to go from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. So give it a try. I hope you found this useful, and if you have any questions about this or any personal experiences that you'd like to share, drop them in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!